วิทยากรคือมิสเตอร์เอ็ดเวิร์ดวอร์นิโกสกี้นะครับตอนนี้เขาเป็นซีเนียร์คูเรเตอร์อยู่ที่ Smithsonoan National Zoological Park Conservation Biology Institute นะครับซึ่งวิทยากรท่านนี้ก็จะเป็นผู้ที่มีประสบการณ์ด้านซูดีไซน์ด้านการออกแบบสวนสัตว์มามากกว่า18 ปีนะครับแล้วก็เป็นคนที่ออกแบบและออกแนวคิดในด้านเกี่ยวกับการจัดการเกี่ยวกับสวนสัตว์พิพิธภัณฑ์อควาเรียมต่างๆมามากมายนะครับแล้วก็ถือว่าเป็นผู้เชี่ยวชาญด้านซูดีไซน์อันดับต้นๆเลยก็ได้ว่าได้นะในปัจจุบันนะครับโอเคนะครับLadies and gentlemen, please welcome our speaker for this topic, the topic about do and don't for zoo design. Please welcome Mr. Edward Bronikowski.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Ed Bronikowski. I'm the senior curator at the Smithsonian's National Zoological Park in Washington, D.C. I'm here as part of a group working on preliminary master plan for the new National Zoo of Thailand. And just as I was about to get on the plane, they asked me to present to you all. And the idea was, could you present on the things you don't do when designing a zoo and the things you should do when designing a zoo. So while I was on the airplane, I came up with a list that I will refer to here, and the do's and don'ts. The first section has to do with facilities, that is the physical structures, and the second section has to do with the guest experience. So, don't design or engineer on the fly. In other words, don't do it, you're engineering and you're designing just as you're moving along so quickly. Do develop your design through what we call a program of requirements. A program of requirements is not design. What it is, in the case of, say, a curator or a keeper or a director, is that you are defining just the space that you need, you're defining the utilities that you need, whether it's air conditioning or electrical power or plumbing or drains. It's defining the criteria throughout the year and putting all of that in place before you go to design. Don't assume a project will be in one phase. Plan for the future. Do plan for the future with enhancements and expansions. Don't go cheap on the utilities infrastructure. In other words, make sure you do have quality engineering and construction, because that will help provide for the future. I've been on many projects over 40 years, and oftentimes I like to think that I am designing for the curator 25 years from now. So I like to imagine the curator replacing me 25 years from now, looking at the facility and feeling that, boy, they really got that right. They did a good job. Don't put in technical systems that you can't maintain, because we're going rapidly with all kinds of electronic control systems and all that is wonderful, and all that should be pursued. But make sure you've got the people and staff to both operate it and understand its maintenance. Don't ignore the staff. What do I mean by that? Don't ignore the staff. That is, the people that are living and working in the areas that you're going to design. Make sure that the program of requirements is specific and has staff input. Don't assume that you're designing, that you know everything that you need to design for everybody, because you can't. So involve the staff that are going to be living or working in those environments. Don't, in the case of a zoo, Don't place service roads within the view of the guests. Do off-exhibit service roads and make sure there are plenty of service roads that get to the back of house areas. Don't place structures or exhibits over utility runs. In other words, the underground utilities. Don't build on top of that. Do have accessible utilities, including information technology infrastructure. Don't forget about storage. Do consider the kinds of storage that your facility will need to operate efficiently. There's outdoor storage where you're just sitting it outside. There's sheltered storage where you want to keep it out of the sun or the rain. And then there's also storage or air-conditioned facilities. Don't make service areas too small. By service areas, I mean do have your workshops, metal shops, carpentry shops, plumbing shops, electrical shops. Do have those with adequate space, including their service vehicles. Don't ignore placement of support facilities and administration facilities. Do design for efficiency in operations and communications. So what I mean by that is there's oftentimes an advantage to have centralized operational and administration facilities because you're just close to each other and it's easier to communicate with each other and you're not taking time in moving from one end of the park to the other to meet with somebody or whatever. So do try to keep it all together. Don't ignore sustainability. I've learned that this is a King's philosophy on the planning that we're doing, and I see that the master plan is going to accommodate sustainability. Don't ignore fire protection. This is my first time in Thailand, and it's good to see that there is good fire protection in the buildings here, and it should be the same for the zoo. Don't forget to plan for what we call shelter in place. If you have a park, a zoo park, full of guests, and a terrible storm comes in, or some other emergency is taking place, you want to consider where can those people take shelter. Don't depend only on primary animal containment. And what I mean by primary is it's the first containment system that actually holds the animal. Do have secondary containment, and in the case of the more dangerous animals, consider even more containment systems. Also, don't ignore the security perimeter. Of course, we want to keep our animals in, but do protect the park from outside forces. We don't want unscrupulous people coming into the park at different times. Don't ignore planning for emergencies. Do include power outages, response. Do include safety drills. Don't be weak on an emergency plan and system for animal containment. Do ensure that all staff in the park know how to respond safely to an animal escape. When building a zoo or new exhibits or working with contractors, don't let contractors avoid providing the facility what we call as-built drawings. In other words, do insist on as-built digitalized drawings that can be on record for the zoo. And then finally, in facilities, don't exclude commissioning on all mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and HVAC systems. Do insist on commissioning and client training on the operations of these new systems. Commissioning is something that I find is very important. I work a lot with aquariums and aquatic exhibits. And what commissioning is that the engineers and the architects will design a facility for you to certain specifications. They will be specifying, for example, a certain amount of air conditioning load or a certain amount of flow rate through a pump and filter system or a certain electrical load, etc. So it gets designed, engineered, and constructed. Commissioning now is a special process that is provided where you actually measure the delivery of the air conditioning system in cubic meters per minute or whatever. You measure the pump capacity and the filter capacity in gallon or liters per minute or whatever. In other words, you're confirming that the equipment installed is operating at the design standards of the original intent. Okay, now this section has to do with the guest experience in zoos. Again, it's a don't and do list. Don't assume the guest experience and park reputation starts at the entry to the zoo. What do I mean by that? Do recognize that the park's reputation begins when the guests are first thinking about visiting the zoo. So your website and city maps and all that should be considering the zoo experience from the very start. The zoo experience should also be how they get to the zoo and how you can make it easier for them to get to the zoo. And then once they arrive at the zoo, their expectations should be met in regards to a very good arrival experience. Don't assume that the number one reason for visitors coming to the zoo is to see animals. Do understand that there have been surveys done, and the number one fundamental reason people visit zoos is for family and social engagement. It's a time to go to a park. It's time to socialize with family or people. Now, once they're there, they expect to see animals, of course. But consider that in your park design and everything that you do. Don't assume that most viewing is of the animals. Do know that people watching is a big part of the zoo experience. Do know that visitors view the zoo map more than any other exhibit in the zoo. Don't assume that guests want or need a long or complex introduction to the zoo arrival. Do assume that they want restrooms, an information desk, a map. They want to see the first animal, and it should be, and that first animal should be something that's representative of your entire institution. It's setting the standard. Don't make long paths with little to see or do. I have worked in the theme park industry, and theme parks have something of a formula where about every 30 meters there is something for the guest. It might be an exhibit, it might be a interpretive station, it might be a restroom, it might be a food cart, it might be some directional, it might be a garden, but it's something about every 30 meters. Don't mix sign types the signs that you put in the park. Do consider that there are primarily three kinds of signage in the park. One is the arrival theme. So if you're going into, let's say you're designing an African animal exhibit, and as the visitor approaches, you have the arrival of Africa signage. Secondly, then you have directional signage. How do people get through the park? Which way is it to the lions and tigers? Which way is it to the giraffe? Which way is it to the penguins, etc.? And then finally, there's a third set of signage, which is the utility signs. In other words, it's the staff-only signs, it's the do not enter signs, that sort of thing. So these three categories of sign, each should have their own design style, and then visitors will find it a lot more enjoyable and easier to find their way through the park. Don't ignore the creature comforts for guests. What I mean, do include shade, air-conditioned areas, water, adequate restroom, benches, etc. Don't ignore safety. There's safety of guests, safety of staff, and safety of animals. And don't ignore emergency planning. Have plans in place to protect the guests from bad weather, from medical emergencies where they might have to be extracted from the zoo, or from animal escapes. And don't miss defining visitor hours. Do address seasonal hours, evening event hours, holiday celebrations, etc. And then finally, I say don't ignore ADA. ADA is the American Disabilities Act. So this is the laws that make us provide access to people of all abilities. So do design for a better for ADA. And in my experience, when we moved from traditional design to ADA design, I found that the guest experience for everybody was much improved. So do consider that. I've got like 2 minutes here. So let me just, I've got some stuff on exhibits, which I said, don't build something that you can't maintain. Do involve all departments in pre-design meetings to ensure staff and resources will be available. Don't do the minimum animal care standards. Do look for the future of the World Zoo standards. So what's proper today might not be proper 20 years from now. Again, there's safety of the animals, so do protect the animals from abuse by guests. And don't use glass as a barrier unless you do use glass when reflections can be controlled. Don't interrupt the view. So sometimes we design exhibits at a wonderful view shed, and then as an afterthought we say, okay, let's put in the interpretive graphics, and it interrupts the view. Don't do realistic exhibit presentations where you're making it look like real Africa or real Amazonia rainforest, and you spend a lot of money doing that, and then we put in metal feed pans and plastic boxes and that sort of stuff that interferes with the view. And don't ignore backup or redundant systems. Have a plan B when power fails, water fails, or there's severe weather or other emergencies. And then finally, don't guess at visitors' knowledge or retention abilities. In the design, particularly of interpretive design, there are three kinds of valuation processes that you can follow, and they will provide you great insight. One is called front-end evaluation. Say this literally happened to me. We were designing an Australia exhibit at the Washington, D.C., and we have a very educated guest clientele. So we're designing an Australia exhibit, and everybody knows that kangaroos come from Australia, right? Well, we did front-end evaluation, asking our guests in a very formal way to see what they knew about kangaroos and Australia. 65% of the people we approached did not know kangaroos are from Australia. So that took us down a path of interpretive path. The second kind of evaluation is formative evaluation. And so this is where you're actually making your videos or your graphics or your interpretive text or your education plan. So you draft one, and then you take it and present it to a small group of people. It only has to be 10 or 20 people, and you can get a good idea whether you're going in the right direction. The third is summative evaluation process. So you've done the front-end evaluation, you drafted up some interpretive material, you presented it to people, you've adjusted it, and now you put it out in the park, and guests are viewing it. Summative evaluation takes a look at whether the guests are getting it, and whether they're actually reading the graphic, understanding the graphic, interpreting the graphic. An example that we had, again, is that we work with endangered species. There's a beautiful golden lion tamarin from Brazil that we did a lot of conservation work on, and reintroduction to the wild work. And so we had a wonderful graph, a bar graph, showing the population growing of the golden lion tamarins in the wild. But nobody was reading it. But our graphic designer went and took a little golden monkey and put it on top of each of the bars on the graph. And then all of a sudden there was 90% retention of the graph. So I encourage front-end formative and summative evaluation in this process. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you all. It's been my honor to be sure, and thank you.